Let me start off this way. Does anyone have any questions or something that they really need to work into specifically related to the introductory lessons? Because every single one of you are still working your way through those. And so I'd like to open up the floor if there's something that's caught you or Sachin, did you raise your hand?
I did. My questions were more very beginning. Um, when we do the vowels A I E O U,
Uh,
um, is the I mean, there's one paragraph about it, so it's kind of very brief, right? There's not much. Hey, do this.
yeah.
Um, I did it, and I found it um, inferior. I'm just going to use that word, inferior to the sort of other chanting and yogic practices that I use. The
Sure.
Om sound, and is that? Do you think that's maybe it's just because I'm an initiate? I don't do it regularly enough, or are those meant for differently or different purposes? Or so wanted to chance kick that off as a conversation and see what folks think about it.
Yeah. So, right. Good observation. And I will say that, let's see, I had actually had this conversation with someone just a couple days ago. I know who they are. But as far as things like the sound of Om, right? That Om sound, um, that's got a particular frequency, and the symbol itself, along with the utterance of that, actually has a gateway type of effect. It allows something to come in or to leave. Yeah, and so it's got a very uh, specific nature to it. If you can see what's happening electrically or in the unseen worlds when that sound is uttered, you'll see kind of a vortex open, right, where something can go in and something can go out in the space that you're occupying at that moment. As far as vowel sounds go, and specifically the point of the exercise was to increase your awareness and detection on what certain sounds cause inside of you. Okay, so I didn't want to point to anything in particular as far as what that sound like E can be used for, or ah, or any of those others, but just to draw your attention to how it feels inside, and also to whether it resonates with a particular part of you. And the reason for that sort of small introduction to it is because in time, we'll go through an entire course on how to use sound in a very particular way to do things like effect healing, and to invigorate or dull different systems within oneself. Okay, I shouldn't say dull. I should say invigorate or anesthetize certain systems in oneself, depending on what you need to accomplish at that point in time. So don't worry, Sachin. I agree with you that the Om sound, for example, would have a much more profound impact than like ah or e or o or oo or any of those types of sounds at this point in time. But it's more important to just register where they sit inside you, because you will probably feel their resonance in different parts of your complex, yeah, as you utter them.
Yeah, and actually, that's a very good point because though every word felt different, like different parts of my body, I don't think it went. I don't think my that part of the body was vibrating in that frequency, but it was starting to. And so I think to your point, it might be good to hint where to feel it for somebody who doesn't, who doesn't has never done this before. I know you're saying don't lead them on, like let them experience it themselves, but the experience is so subtle that it's very easy to miss for somebody who doesn't know what to look for.
Okay, good. That's good feedback. I'll probably include that in the atrium type of lessons rather than in the introductory lessons, just because of the nature of the work that it goes into, specifically to do with the five centers. It's very interesting because you can actually stop someone dead in their tracks, not dead physically, but freeze somebody by making certain types of sounds, right? And so in martial arts, which most of you know that I've been involved in for many decades, there are particular sounds that you can make that will stop somebody, right, from even being able to attack you to begin with. That's just one example. The more um, enlightened example would be certain healing sounds and so on. So I'll definitely go into that Sachin. You've corrected me, by the way. I've been saying it wrong for a year. Sachin, I will go into that in more detail in upcoming things. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Anything else before I get into one or two points? Yeah, Asad.
Uh, Thank you. I read the last lesson today, and the interesting thing for me is how we precisely become in tune with a certain frequency. Because the lesson was very interesting for me. I heard about the ray of creation before, but the interesting part was that. Um, was mm, the interesting part was for me was the um, mm, oh sorry was
Okay.
that there are many invisible things maybe or that have frequencies we can attune into them become attuned in them. I want to know how to attune ourselves in a certain frequency.
Ah, excellent. Okay. That's a very good question. And it takes as its foundation the idea that everything in the universe is a frequency. Everything in the universe has a particular vibration to it, right? And I've given you may have come across this in Eamon before, the idea of the tuning fork principle,
Hmm.
which, if you haven't heard of it, goes like this. If I have tuning fork is used to tune like a piano or some musical instrument, right? And they're generally tuned to a particular frequency, usually A in the case of most musical instruments. So if I'm holding one, looks like this. It's a little device that generally looks like that, right? It's just got tongs on the top and a handle to hold on to. And if I strike one of these tongs and it produces a frequency, that frequency of A, okay? Now, that's just transmitting it out. That would be like something that you wish to connect to in the unseen worlds. For example, if you wish to connect to the essence of patience, or the essence of care, or the essence of various particular religious influences that have shown up on the planet, or any number of things, then that would be the signal out there in creation that's kind of constantly transmitting. Now, here's the interesting thing. I'm holding one of these, okay? And if I hand Pleiades another one, tuned to the same note, and she listens very carefully, when I strike mine, hers will begin to vibrate in sympathy to it without her having to strike it, without her having to do anything. She's just able to pick it up. Yeah. And so this brings us to the expression that's called the tuning fork principle, that things that are alike will receive and transmit information to and from one another. Yes. Now, this raises the idea of there's an expression that it says it takes gold to get gold. And all economics aside, right, which we do see in business, for example, if you want to start a business, you have to have investment capital, don't you? You have to have money to make money. But in the more esoteric and occult realms of things, you have to have a bit of something within you in order to get more of it. Yeah. And so this is where I'll just use care as an example. We have within us absolutely everything that's in the universe to some degree or another. All right. This is why we're called, you're familiar with the term microcosm. It means small universe. Yeah. It means the miniature universe. And within you and all of your various systems that interact with one another, you have inside of you a little bit of everything that exists in the entirety of creation. In order to connect to something, and in order to grow and build that in yourself, you have to kind of dust that part of you off and bring it into the light and strike it, or at least listen to it, right? And then you can hear the other areas in all of creation that exhibit this. And so I'll give you a rather rough example, okay? And it has to do with the idea or the nature of care. Now, in our culture, we think that killing something isn't necessarily a valid demonstration of the essence of care, right? Would you agree? Generally speaking, yeah, that would almost be the antithesis of care. But if you look into the natural worlds, and you take a lion, for example, and a lion has 4 cubs, okay, but there's only enough food in her environment to feed 3 of them, what will she do? She'll eat 1 or 2 of them, right? She'll eat them, kill them, eat them, reconsume them so that the others might survive. Now, I'll ask you, is this an instance of care? See, it is an instance of care based on design, okay? Because one of the lioness's designs is to be able to continue the species in general, yeah? And so instead of trying to feed all 3 of them when there's not enough food to go around, or 4 of them, or whatever the case was, she will engineer a situation, you know, because they would all die at that point in time, including the lioness herself, right? So she would engineer a situation where the ones that can survive will survive. Now, the reason why I bring this up as an example of care is because unless you get in touch with that essence of it in yourself first, you would look at a situation like that with horror instead of care. You would look at a situation or an outcome like that as the opposite of care, when in fact, it's a demonstration of care. You see? And so this is the difference between actually detecting something in yourself and in the unseen worlds around you versus trying to go into intention. And people do this all the time. They think that if they want more care, they have to go out and become like Mother Teresa. Right? They have to go out and start giving away their belongings and giving away their food, and helping absolutely everyone with all the meantime, or all the meanwhile sacrificing everything one has for oneself. And I would ask you, is that genuinely a demonstration of care? Because at the very least, are you not equal to everyone else? And you give up all that you are in care of and support of something else, then what you're saying is that this is more important than you are, and that there is an imbalance, right? Now, a real demonstration of care could be extended to one's home and one's ecology, for example. Can you don't have to answer this, but can you, in your own home, can you walk past a scrap of paper that's, a little dot of paper sitting on the floor without picking it up and throwing it where it belongs? Right? It's easy to do. It's easy to not see that as an aspect of care. But to connect to things requires some sort of action, some sort of actual manifestation of it on your part. And it always begins with the small things. We're notorious here for, when we're done with the toilet paper, right, in the bathroom, leave the roll and forget to replace the roll, right? Leave the old spent roll and forget to replace the roll. And I think, a lot of people are guilty of that one, because it's, you finish what you're doing and you're on to the very next thing. Whereas if one was pursuing care, then they would take care in all of these small details. So what I'm driving at has to do with an esoteric principle, which is, and it's not even esoteric, it's actually should be taught in kindergarten, but it's to put into action everything that you intend to do. You have to give everything a physical manifestation. I'll give you an exercise. Here's the esoteric bit of it. That part's not esoteric. The esoteric bit comes in when I say this, that it rarely matters what that action is, as long as it actually happens. So I'll give you an example. This will remind you, and some of you, of the lesson that you had a few months ago. Let's say that I wish to acquire something new in myself, to connect to something. Like, well, we'll just stick with care for now, but it could be like, Patera, Egypt, or Hello, whatever the case is. And if I just sit and say, I sure would like to connect to the essence of it, that would be very nice, right? And I don't actually do anything. I don't give it any kind of expression. What I've created in myself is an incomplete triangle. Everything comes down to this one symbol, amongst two others. I set an intention, right? I contemplate it, or maybe I even feel it, like you pray, for example, pray for it. And this is what people do all the time. Oh, can you not see this? Can you see the triangle? Yeah, okay. Oh, okay. Having a wish and then praying for it, right? For example, and then never doing anything about it creates an incomplete triangle. It creates an imbalance. I think I'll probably discuss this today in greater detail, where you've got just two poles, nothing coming about, nothing there to be able to do it. Now, here's the secret. I don't have to do much to get it, because it's already inside me. I can connect to it by something very simple. As simple as this. If I want to experience more care in myself, I create that intention in me. That's the will.
Hey, Pierce.
Yeah.
Your sound's a little bit muffled. I don't know if the mic's too far away.
Thank you. Is this any better?
Yeah, better.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. I create that intention in myself, right? I make it my desire, my God. I build that up in there. And then I think to myself, I'm going to take 3 steps. And when I reach that spot in the floor, I will have it. Now, you may think to yourself, that's ridiculous. Why would that work? It works because it introduces the physical aspect of things. Have you ever asked yourself why you need a body? Right? I mean, couldn't you just get along just fine as a spirit or a soul? Think on this for a minute. Okay, so I finished the demonstration. I summon this in myself. I take 3 steps and I arrive. And the very fact that I actually put into physical action what it was that I was generating electrically is going to connect me to that to some degree. You see, this is why you can practice something like the Eminent Way in everyday life. You don't have to go to a mosque, a temple, a monastery, a church. Right? You carry it around with you. It really has to do with what you do with what you've got. You see, I can hold this piece of chalk. And if I want Egypt, for example, to show up, and I put that intention there just in a physical action. Yeah. Now, here, all of a sudden, the atmosphere shifted, didn't it? Did you feel that? The atmosphere shifted because I gave it some physical expression. Now, who wants to solve the mystery of why we need a physical body? Okay, Mike.
Okay, Mike.
To bring formless into form.
How so?
By putting into action and manifesting the thing that you want to bring into the world, or yeah. I guess that's what I want to say.
Yeah. It's true. What you're saying is very true. And I'll go a bit deeper on this one from the standpoint that if you've had the lesson, I'm not sure, Melly, how far along you are in these. I think you've had it already.
Yeah.
But the nature of energy and matter. We've discussed it a little bit, that energy and matter, like Einstein proposed, E equals mc squared, are the same thing. Yeah, just in a different state. And so energy in its non-material form is just moving, right? It hasn't coalesced anywhere, whereas matter, this physical substance, has condensed. All right, they're all bumping into each other and creating what I called standing waves, in space. You remember, probably saw the lesson. Now, the reason why this is vital, that you actually have a physicality to you in order to create any sort of change, is due to another law in creation. It has to do with the concept of inertia and momentum. If you, I should get more toys for down here, shouldn't I? If you have a children's top, a top, and you spin it and it spins around, right? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. You have a children's top and you set it to spin. And it's kind of doing its thing. It's waving around the table. And then it gets sort of close to the edge of the table. Can you just tap it and hope that it, comes back to the center with any degree of certainty that it's going to come back to the center? Can you do that? So you can't. No, because it's already in motion. And whatever tap you give it would have an unpredictable result. It's just as likely to go darting to the center of the table as it is to go plummeting off the other end of the table, right? It's unpredictable because it's already in motion. You see, an energy in the universe, when it's not in this form, is in motion. Now, in order to change something, we'll continue with the analogy of the top. If I want to reset its direction, I have to stop it and bring it where I want it and start it again. And then I can hopefully get its direction going the way that I want it to. You follow so far? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's what incarnation is. When you incarnate into a physical body, it is the top that stops. Okay? It is all of your energy gets frozen into a container so that things can be adjusted and you can be moved to a different part of the table, right? To follow the analogy, the example a little bit, and then start up again. And that's called death, when that top starts up again. And so the only way to change is to freeze something, you see, and that's the way that the law works in the universe. You cannot, in spiritual form, unless you are contained by something, then you will simply be dispersion. You will simply be in unpredictable motion. So this is really quite an opportunity, actually, to be able to change. And this is why the ancients used to call this life on earth as the crucible of change. A crucible is literally like a pot, isn't it? Right? And that's what it takes to be able to do it. So I bring this up because it goes into the idea, and someone opened a chat. Can you monitor those? Or is it a hand raise or a chat?
No, it's just me
jump in.
putting the phone call details if Jan wants to call in.
The what now?
The conference call, phone call details.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay, great. So the reason why this is almost like I could say this is the foundation of magic, right? Although magic is very, very much misunderstood in our modern age. You have to put something into physical practice. You have to actually do something with the intentions and the emotions and the will that you generate towards something for it to happen. And so you had started off this conversation by asking, how do I connect to something? I'll sum it up this way. You already have a bit of it in you. Okay. You have to find where it lives in its truest form, like the lioness example that I gave, right? Throw away the cultural aspects of it and find where it lives in its truest forms. And then have that intention, have that will, have that desire to have more of it in your life, and then make some sort of physical action. And the real thing is that it doesn't matter much what that physical action is, as long as you do something with it, because then you're involving the frozen universe, You understand? You're involving the physical manifestation of its occurrence on the planet. Now, it can be something as simple as picking up the dot of paper, scrap of paper, throwing the toilet paper roll away and replacing it, or any number of things. Or it can be as simple as taking a piece of chalk with the right kind of intention and transferring it to your other hand, or setting it down, or any number of things. You see, you can literally, and I do say almost anything, you can literally do almost anything, and you can bring that about. This is the power of ritual, by the way, yeah, and ceremony, and all of these types of things, where you go to almost any religious institution, and they have these various ceremonies that they enact. It's a play, it's a passion play, to be able to induce a particular essence. And frankly, if you're interested in bringing into attendance various religious essences, the only place to start with that is to understand what those passion plays are, yeah, and carry it out in your own space. It makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk about this a bit more. Who has heard the term third force blind? Raise your hand. If I raise my hand, the camera starts to follow me around because it's triggered into that signal. So I don't want to do it, but raise your hand. Third force blind. Not Third Eye Blind, which is, I think, a musical group. Yeah. Okay. I'll explain this, and then I will go into where to look for the third force. Because of this physical expression that we have on the planet, we have a bit of a shifted view. I'm going to share an idea with you that in the unseen worlds of force and power, you can represent those as like a cross type of symbol going this way. Sometimes we call this the solar cross, all right? Whereas the physical cross is up and down this way. And this has to do with a shift in perception or a shift in axis of something. And I'll say this, okay? I'm going to draw a diagram like this. Male and female. Well, I'm going to do it this way, actually. I'm going to start this over here. Male and female. This is what was initially thought of as apparent opposites. If you have the reference, okay. We look to one side and we see a boy. We look to another side and we see a girl. We look to one side and we see hot. We look to another side and we see cold. So on and so forth. Positive, negative, all of these types of things. North, south, east, and west. Right. These are all these kinds of opposites. The problem with our perception about this is that they're not actually opposites. What they truly are is adjacent to one another. And the best way I can demonstrate this is really because our brain life, our mind life, our conscious awareness of things doesn't sit on the physical perspective. It sits like this. It's on the electrical side of things. Okay, so you have your brain life that's sitting like this, and it looks to one side, right? It's superimposed upon the physical world, and it looks to one side and it sees, male's over here, right? Because it's looking, it's here, do you see? Okay, this is where it sits. So it looks left and it goes, oh, okay, over there is male, and it looks right and it says, oh, okay, over here is female. These must be opposites. But they're not, do you see? What they really are is they are both aspects of gender. If you could have something truly opposite, it would have no gender. It would be not male nor female. It would be whatever you can possibly imagine is the opposite, actual opposite of that, sharing no characteristics whatsoever. You see, it wouldn't have gender. Opposite of hot would not be cold. It would be something that has no relation whatsoever to temperature. Whatsoever. Right? Because hot and cold are both aspects of temperature, right? They share that in common. So that's the idea of apparent opposites. I'm going to unlock a little bit more where the law of three sits in relation to things. Let us take male and female. And I gave a part of this lesson to someone who also knows who they are. Yeah, we have these ideas of opposites. Something is male and female. Anytime the law of three shows up, in other words, this neutralizing vector of something, it's because something else intersects the law of two. You've got a vertical axis, right, that we call male and female. In this example, it could be north and south. The only reason for their potential to be able to manifest is because something else that also has a duality intersects it. So, for example, you have birth and death on the timeline of life. Okay, so this is another, you follow so far, these are one opposite is intersected by another set of opposites. Now you have the possibility of multiple things happening, because then you can form triangles. The opposite of male is both birth and is death as well as birth, you see. But what you introduce into this is a triangle with all sorts of different possibilities. So let's take it from the get-go here. Let's say male and birth. Now you have child, yeah, at the third vector. Birth, or I should say son, right? Male, boy, yes. At birth and female, you have girl, right? And at male and death, you have old man. And at death and female, you have old lady. You see, now we're getting into this idea here that in any third vector, there's always going to be four apparent opposites, or I should say four apparent neutralizers to something, because of the way that this exists. Now, whenever we freeze it and isolate it, we're only looking for one in particular. Okay, so we start to draw this triangle of something here. This is where you arrive at something's true opposite, where you've got male, child, and birth. That's the law of three. You see, people are always looking in the wrong aspect. They're like, okay, what's the opposite of hot and cold? Well, let's pursue that one for a minute. This will open up your mind a bit. So we've got the bar of hot and cold, right? The bar of temperature, I should say. Hot and cold, they're opposites. You know, you can't have hot alongside cold or cold alongside hot. It's either one or the other, isn't it? Or a scale somewhere in between. But unlimited heat and unlimited cold cannot exist in the same space at the same time, right? So what comes in between to intercept them is wet and dry. You also cannot have wet and dry in the same space at the same time. It's either, you know, somewhat wet, somewhat dry, but it's not the ultimate of one or the other, you see. So these are two bars that cross one another. Now, what do we get when we introduce the third vector into this? What do we get when we introduce hot and dry? Anyone want to take a stab at this? What's hot and dry? I'll give you all a hint, then I'll let you take it from there. Fire. Right? The nature of fire, hot and dry. Wet and cold. Do you see that we're going after the four elements here? What are the four elements? Do you know? Right?
The fourth one is the air. We haven't covered air.
Fire, we've got air, we've got water,
Or earth.
and earth. All right, so where does this fit? So wet and cold, or wet and hot, which would it be for water? I'm going to let you all use your resources to work it out. We're going after the four elements here. Or cold and dry. Would you say that belongs to air or water? Probably not water because it's not dry.
Say it's earth.
Cold and dry is earth. Right? Is that right? So then wet and cold.
Water.
Water, right. And hot and wet. Only leaves one, doesn't it? Yeah, the idea of steam. Almost, yeah. Something hot and wet. Now, so what I'm saying in here is that whenever you're looking at something like the law of three and trying to find this neutralizing vector in something, it's this positive, negative, neutral, it's important to understand or have the understanding that anytime you have an expression of the law of three, it's actually two dissimilar laws of two coming together and forming that triangle in there. So starting to make sense? This is one that throws so many people, right? Because they're always thinking in terms of like, for example, man, woman, child, positive, negative, neutron, or proton, electron, neutron, things like that, when it's not quite like that. You do realize, right, that you wouldn't be able to determine north or south unless there was an east or west. You see that?
I'm seeing a role for context.
Tell me what you mean.
All right. So that third vector gives it more clear definition.
Yeah.
So that to get more accurate in what you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah. And the reason why is because like these four elements, they're constantly changing into one another. You know, the ancient Chinese had this already figured out. They have something called the I Ching, which was, they started off with, have you guys seen these types of symbols before? They start off with something that is two solid lines and two broken lines. And they said, okay, this is positive, masculine, this is negative and neutral, right? And then they come up with all these combinations of it. You can have one positive with one broken with one positive, right? And so on and so forth, you see. And what they did is they threw a third one into there. And the reason why they threw the third one in is because it's the one that changes. This is called the I Ching, by the way. You should look it up. It's very much along these lines.
It's very interesting. I got familiar with it recently.
You just looked into it recently?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Great. And so the I Ching starts off something like this, right? Where they say, between heaven and earth. I'm messing that up. Let's do this again. Or between extreme positive and extreme negative, right? 3 lines in there. And then they say, okay, now that's interesting. Any one of these can change. And so they would say, if this one changed, then it becomes like that, right? If this one changes, then it becomes, like that. In this case, this will be their symbol for fire. And if this one changes, then it becomes like that. You see, and they come up with all of these what are called hexagrams based on these alternations of each of these ones changing. Well, this changing one has to do with which neutral vector they're talking about, right? Is it air, earth, water, or fire? In the example, if you wanted to draw the hexagrams of the hot, cold, wet, dry vectors. Okay, and this fits into the Enneagram quite nicely because then each of these takes a specific place within the Enneagram, if you're familiar with the Enneagram. Yeah, someone did say a 3-pint night at the beginning. Yeah, I think we're 2.5 in.
I'm seeing binary code in this.
Yeah, definitely. That's who invented it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could certainly look at it that way. You could have 1, 1, 1. Yeah, you know the binary code. That would be all positives between 0, 0, 0. Sachin, you could probably fill out the rest quite easily. Really? Sure, you could. Yeah, it's 1, 2, 4, right?
I suck at this. I suck at the bit manipulation. Every interview answer question that I flunk. I'm like, I'm not a computer science guy.
But in that, because right, that's the raw data of something, so it needs that third force to manifest.
Yeah, it does. But understand that third force, the reason why we're third force blind is because it's always changing depending on what we're talking about in something. Yeah, it's not. This is why people get so hung up on the idea of looking for the third force in something. Like, well, man and woman can produce a child, but man and woman can also get together and run a company. They can also get together and fight. They can also get together and, like any number of things. It's because of that changing nature of that third force in there, depending on what it is that you're actually talking about, depending on the context. And it's always on the move. It's always running, flowing, you see. Yeah. Just gauging for a moment where everyone's at with this. I feel like everyone has this almost pregnancy in their mind, like it's just about to break through for you. Keep going, Jeffrey. I see it in you.
Yeah, it's that movement of force. So I'm just kind of recalling your top metaphor. And although that's random, I'm just kind of weaving it live. Although that's random, you made reference to magic and command of that magic, so that if we bring in intentionality, consciousness, then we become a force of creation.
Ooh. Yes, very true. You can become a force of creation if you know how to intelligently manipulate that third force, that third vector. Yeah. This goes into the idea of the octave. All right, we've got do, re, mi. All right, we start off C, D, E. There's no E sharp or F flat. Yeah, there's no something in between mi and fa, you see. So we'll stop right there for the moment. This is the first place where every endeavor stops, if it's an intention. Let's take the example of starting a business. There's nothing unholy about such a thing. Okay? Let's take the example of starting a business. You get the idea of forming a business and you say, okay, this is my concept, right? And you flush it out. That's the sound of do inside you, right? You begin this momentum. And then it goes re, where you identify and collect the various things that you need to run the business. Let's say that it's a grocery store. You gather a list of inventory and you populate the store with inventory. Okay. Finally, the day mi comes along, where you open the doors. 1, 2, 3, nice and easy. Yeah. Have the idea, get ready and prepared for it, aggregate what you need, which is a lunar thing, right? Re. And open the doors, which is a very planetary thing, mi, microcosm. If you have the reference. Now what? What do you need at this point?
Customers.
Yeah, you need customers, right? Otherwise, you've just got a grocery store that's eventually going to fail, wouldn't it? Yeah. And so what you need at this point in time is this outside influence here that I erased part of my mi, that comes in and fills this natural stop in here. And then it can go fa, sol, la, si. Now, what you're saying, Jeffrey, is really tied into this from the standpoint of you have to know what it is you need at this point in order to perform magic, as you say, or as I say, as we say. If you decide to bring in buckets full of dirt instead of customers, yeah, it's not going to happen. If you decide to go shopping at someone else's store to bring in produce, it's not going to happen, right? You have to do specific things to continue this octave. And this is where 99.9% of all of our efforts in life end up strange, end up different than what we expected them, end up to be diverting. Yeah, because we, instead of bringing in customers through advertising, for example, we bring in buckets of dirt, something that's not appropriate. And we start a new octave, really, because you can bring in buckets of dirt, but buckets of dirt just creates a new dough.
Sorry,
Okay.
and we are unconscious about this fact. We do it unconsciously.
Yeah, generally speaking, I think the intentions that people have, the reason why they go unfulfilled is because they're not consciously aware of what's needed at this point. This is, if you imagine a river and you're trying to navigate the river, this is that narrow spot where you have to be very careful and maneuver it very safely. Yeah. And then it can continue on. But you're right. For the most part, people are completely unconscious of this. They don't know what's required in order to have something achieved. Now, this is very, very relevant when it comes to engaging in a personal development journey, isn't it? That'll
So
be
I
picked
want
up.
to add, Pierce, here that it's not necessarily unconsciously, but it's unknowingly.
Unknowingly, yeah.
Like they don't. I mean, I think we here talk about a lot of people going through the motions without really knowing what they're doing. But in a situation like this, it's likely that they're very conscious. They're stressed out. They're trying to get something to work, but they just don't know. They just don't. So it's more unknowingly. There's probably some unconsciousness in it, but it's more unknowingly. And if they actually consciously try to know, consciously seek out the knowledge, read it, ask people, ask an expert, then they can figure it out. And then
Yeah.
it'll not. And even after that, if it's not right, then I guess we have to look into what happened. And it's usually something that either is beyond their control or they just don't know it enough yet.
Right. Or it was an ill-sounded dough to begin with. Ill-formed dough to begin with. Right? The unconscious part of it comes in with the initial note that we sound sometimes. We say, I want to start a business, but what we really mean is that I want to start a hobby. You see, it's a different dough, different sound of dough than what we intended in the first place. That's the part that's unconscious, generally is how it begins. The lack of consciousness or the lack of knowledge comes in with not knowing what to fill this. Now, what is that in a personal development journey? Because by your mere presence here, not mere, by your presence here, you've already sounded dough that you wish to engage in a personal development journey. You've made the effort, you've collected yourselves, you've carved out some time in your day, which would be Ray, right? It's a lunar thing. Me is your own active involvement with it. Am I? Me, not me. Is your own active involvement with it. It's your internal process. As you hear these words fall from my mouth, it causes things in you. Yeah. So you've created a little planet in yourself, an ecology allowing this to happen. Because I'll tell you, it's happened before that some people join just because they have nothing better to do, right? Or because they're curious, or because they like to argue, or because whatever. People have various different reasons, yeah? But in a development journey such as this, what's the me of it? It goes all the way back to the beginning of what it is that you attract into your life. You see, it's not me, by the way. It's what you cause and call into your life that bridges that gap. And that goes back to the idea of what we wish to connect to. It's an outside influence. It can never come from the inside. Is that clear? Why it can't come from the inside? Because if it could, you would already be complete. You need something from the outside to come in. Yeah. And when we talk about having these types of interactions with the unseen worlds, essences attending, presences, certain intelligences within the universe, angels, the shining ones, whatever you want to call them. Yeah, they are this outside influence. that comes in to help bridge that gap. But it doesn't happen automatically. You have to have that sort of effort, which I think is why the question of how to connect is so very vital. And I am here to tell you that it can be something as simple as taking a piece of chalk or taking 3 steps or whatever the case might be. You have to give your intentions expression in some way. Yeah. How do you get customers in a store? You have to advertise. It's a physical thing. You don't just go, oh, I want customers so badly, right? And sit and just like meditate and emote about having more customers come into your store. You have to do something, whether it be knocking on doors or putting up flyers or, grabbing people off the street and say, hey, did you know about this? So you have to do it. Yeah. Requires action on your part. Now, this actually opens up a completely different mystery having to do with whether you own your own life, really. And I'll tell you why I say this. Because just like a personal development journey, something like digestion, something like, I'm talking about eating physical food, is a process that does this as well. You see, I've come back to this so many times. You're probably sick of the analogy right now, but you don't take a potato and just slam it into your ear and have brilliant thoughts. It goes through a process of evolution inside of you. Right? You eat it, you chew it, you digest it, it enters the bloodstream, it burns inside your cells, you respirate it out, you excrete it. Like, it's a process, it's an evolutionary process. But guess what? This tells me that there's a certain function or a certain aspect of your physicality that doesn't belong to you. And here's why I say this, because when you eat that potato, you say dough, okay? It's outside of you. You cook it, make it edible. Dough. Ray, automatically. Me, automatically. Now, it encounters this first stop. The potato has now become, it goes from solid, liquid, gas. It is now molecules inside of you that are ready to enter the bloodstream. What has to come in from the outside to cross this barrier from me to Fa is your second food, called air. Without the act of respiration, it would end here, right? It has to be an outside force, something coming in from outside of you to make it go Fa, Lo, La, Si, and then Do. Yeah. But are you really in control of your breathing? Or is it imposed upon you by the planet? It's a very easy one to answer. Try to stop. You can halt it for a little while. In other words, you have some control over your breathing. But ultimately, what will happen if you have a strong enough will to say, okay, I am no longer going to breathe, you will pass out. The planet will take you out, take your intention, take your mind out of the equation, and then start you breathing again. You see. So that raises the question of whose agenda is it that you have a physical existence here? Is it really yours, or are you a function of a planetary purpose where she says, this is my do, re, mi, and I need to push it to fa, sol, la, si? Yeah, it's a good question. And then you get the next encounter. Fa, sol, la, si. And then this is the point where something else has to happen. We're well into 3 pints now, okay? I'm going to give it to you from a different standpoint. Every time an external force comes in, it also sounds a new octave. It sounds a new do within you. All right, so we can say that this is now do, and it also has a re and a mi, and then it encounters a difficulty. Do you know what this difficulty is here? It can't. What bridges this difficulty, would you say? It's impressions. It's impressions received by all of your senses. It's what allows the in-breath to digest. It's just like food, you know. You eat physical food. Air kicks it into the bloodstream where it can ignite, yeah, and go through, finish its process in here. But by the fact of breathing, something else enters you as well. It's another food, and it goes do, re, mi, but it stops here at the level of impressions. And the planet only supplies enough impressions passively to allow it to fulfill its partial duty. There's nothing conscious in this at this point in time. The planet can make, well, do you know what I mean by passive impressions? I'll give you an example. Go outside and watch anybody, wandering around a mall shopping. It's a perfect time of year for it. This is not active impressions. This is not someone out actually engaged in something conscious. They're in response to something. They're in response to the astral light print of this time of year, right? Where they're going out like zombies and shopping for things. Oh, I gotta buy this, gotta buy this, gotta buy this. Yeah, there's nothing conscious about it. A moment of consciousness has an extreme flavor of vividness to it. Extremely vivid. And I know that all of you in your childhood had these moments and are having them more so these days. I know you are. You can think back to any point in time in your childhood, something that it really stands out for you. Yeah, I have this memory of going to an amusement park when I was like really little. Super vivid. I can recall every detail of it to this day. Very vivid. That's what active impressions feel like. Imagine being able to live your life to such a degree of vivification that you have that sense about everything that you encounter, everything that you do. If someone says, "What did you have for breakfast last Tuesday?" It's as exciting to you, it's as vivid to you as, going to that amusement park was to me when I was a child. Yeah. But we don't live like that, do we? And so that's the idea of passive impressions. We're constantly being bombarded from all around us. I mean, unless I draw your attention to it, are you aware of the temperature of the room at the moment? Yeah? Are you aware of how your clothes feel on your body? Are you aware of the various sounds aside from my voice that are going on around you? Those are passive impressions. Nature only does just enough. And the reason why is because she doesn't particularly care whether or not you achieve enlightenment, if you will. You're in service to the planet. You serve your function. You're a processing machine at this level for planetary purpose. You process force, and it doesn't really matter what kind of force it is because it's all energy. Processing something like humility, it's going to rub some people the wrong way. Processing something like humility has no greater value than processing something like anger, unless you do it consciously. Yeah. Unless you do it that way. And the reason why is because if you process anger, you will still transform it, right? This is an impression. This also starts a new dough, you see. But it can't go anywhere generally. But if you process anger, you'll break it down just like you do a potato. You'll release it to the planet, the moon will eat it, and you'll be good to go, right? You've done your duty. If you process humility, same thing. You'll break it down for the planet. She'll go, "Thank you very much," and put it where she needs to put it, and on you go, you see. So part of this journey is learning how to make these impressions count, because this is where your evolution really lives. Your evolution lives there at that level. The rest is taken care of for you, really. So,
I'm seeing this as the bare minimum to sustain life.
well, yeah.
Right.
Here, Marco.
Everything after that is up to us.
Yeah, it's optional. Absolutely optional. Okay, so then why does that exist? And this is the reason. It's because we are imbued with something that is not of this planet, you see. Our soul, well, only a little drip, only a little tiny drop of our soul comes from the planet herself. Did you know that? Most people don't even know the difference between their soul and their spirit, but a little teaspoonful of soul that gets poured into you comes from the planet. The other teaspoonsful come from the other planets in this solar system, which is where you get into astrological type. You see, you've got Mars over here when you're born. You've got Jupiter over there when you're born, and they each contribute a little bit of a frequency to your soul, and this is what comes out as what's known as your essence in you. You like hot food, you don't like hot food, you have an aversion to heights, or you like skydiving. All of these like weird things that end up becoming somewhat endemic to us that make us so different and unique is just these various combinations of soul force, SOUL. For those familiar with the Alpha Curio bet and whatnot, you'll understand why there's a U in there. Is because it's a diminished aspect of something solar. Otherwise, it would be SOL, having to do with the sun. You see, and so you get this this astrological planetary type come into play. Now, that's already to some degree higher than the planet, because you're not just dealing with Earth stuff, although somewhat you are. You're also dealing with, something from Jupiter, something from Saturn, Mars, Neptune, Venus, Pluto, maybe, depending on what the scientists vote, this year. You see, that's what comes into play in your soul. Your spirit is a sun level force that comes in to occupy you. So definitely way outside of planetary existence. You're home to something really, really incredible. But the planet doesn't really have much use for those. She's already got her brothers and sisters in the solar system, and she's already got the sun. Right? She doesn't need those aspects of you. You do. But it's not mandatory to evolve when you're on this planet. You already serve a function. It is, however, optional, and you may do so with the right kind of effort. But then you get into this idea of you have to know what to introduce in yourself. And I would stand here today and argue with Gurdjieff, if he were still here, that he kind of got it all wrong, in a sense. He got it wrong from the sense that what he proposed really isn't attainable anymore, and probably wasn't even hardly attainable at his point in time, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Exceptionally difficult to do at this point in time. He introduced something called self-remembering, self-observation. We lack the power to do that, actually. We don't have that kind of juice to be able to make that a regular thing. So the Eminent way introduces a couple of things into it. It has all of that. It has all the stuff from the fourth way, all right, or from Gurdjieff. I won't call it fourth way because he didn't actually use that term. That was Ouspensky. It has all that because it's great esoteric knowledge, although the way that it was kind of scattered around in the groups makes very little sense. It is a complete body of knowledge somewhere. But instead of doing self-remembering, which was one of his primary exercises, we put ourselves in a position to attract certain things into our life, all right, that will offer mutual enhancement and mutual benefit to us. And we feed that as well, you see. But it doesn't just stop there. We have other exercises to help kind of clean up the pentagrammic system of the body, to help nurture it, to make it work the way that it was intended to, so that this energy that's produced by eating the potato and breathing air and having impressions can actually go somewhere and yield some sort of result. Whatever you make on your own, by your own efforts, you get to keep. That's the biggest secret, because she doesn't have a use for it. She couldn't actually take it if she could get it. If she wouldn't be able to process it. That's why she needs life. But yeah, so we begin our work at the seventh way, which has to do with attracting things into our life. Yeah, attracting these higher things into our life. Eighth and ninth ways are additions to that. But it doesn't rely on self-remembering, because it's not really, it is possible if you correct the machine, but the machine isn't correct right now, and so it's not possible. That's where the work has to begin. You got to kind of correct the functioning of it so that you can run the way you were designed to. And then, the funny thing is that once the machine does become corrected, it's really no longer a process of work in self-remembering. It just happens. It's designed to do that anyway. It's designed to have a higher level of consciousness than what we carry around with it. Takes gold to get gold. Fortunate, it's why you already have solar force inside of you. You wouldn't have this opportunity if you didn't. I hate to say it, but your cats and dogs and Tweety birds and whatnot don't have it. They are planetary. You're an oddball, as am I. Yeah. All right. So that was your 3-pint day. Probably a lot to consider, a lot to process. Who wants to ask a question or chime something in? How are we doing on time anyway? Yeah, a little over.
Yes, I have a question, I guess, or discussion topic. You mentioned this was a few minutes ago, so I've kind of lost. I'm paraphrasing here. You mentioned the two emotions of humility and anger. I am or processing those. So I find there is a nuance there, in the sense that it depends on the type of emotion.
No, not the type. It depends on your own awareness of it. The type of emotion has zero to do with it. What does matter is whether or not you are actually aware and conscious while experiencing it.
Well,
I can tell you something, Sachin. Let me tell you, I'm not one to interrupt much, and I think you know that, but let me tell you this. It really doesn't matter unless you're there to be a part of it. A person can think that they are a good person, right? Because they're generally experiencing all of these positive emotions, and they're experiencing love, joy, humility, all of these types of things. And they can look at someone else and think that they're not as good a person because they're constantly angry, right? Or they're constantly whatever. But the fact of the matter is that unless they are there, present and conscious at the moment, they have no choice. It's just how that soul force shows up in them, right? From all these planetary influences. Unless they're conscious, it has zero value when compared to some other type of emotion. It's all unconscious. Someone who's giving all the time, unless they are giving out of a place of conscious awareness. Listen.
So,
you can have someone who is on an enlightened journey who seems incredibly angry all the time. Did you know this? Because if they're consciously doing it and it's serving a purpose, that has more value than unconscious gratitude, for example. You follow?
I'm not debating I completely agree with you. Like, I agree with you that if you're not conscious, if you're not doing it intentionally, then they are both useless. And if you're doing it consciously, then they're both useful. What I was interested in talking about is just how much of a more unconscious or more planetary emotion anger is, and how much of a lesser planetary or lesser triggering or less instinctive emotion humility is. Humility is in my opinion at least, it's much more sort of higher order of emotion, whereas anger is instinctive. You'll get angry for no reason whatsoever.
See, and this is where I have to come back to the point that I'm making in this, is that for someone who is actually conscious doing it, it's like adding ingredients to a cake. All right. What I mean is that there are times when anger is actually the essential ingredient that is needed in there. But do you see the difference? It's not a reaction in someone who's conscious. It is put in there because it's what's required at the time. And it's not lower or higher, it's just energy, right? If it's a reactionary, then yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, definitely coarser in the scheme of things than something like gratitude. But I will say that if someone consciously introduces the essence of anger into something, and please hear consciously, not reactionary, it's so much more valuable because it's actually needed, right? They do it against a purpose. It's so much more valuable than someone unconsciously introducing humility, gratitude, care, patience, understanding, any of those. So throw away the spectrum of things and focus on what's important, whether you're actually there at the time. If you're conscious and aware of it, this is the easiest way to get rid of anger, is to remind yourself to become conscious of it and observe it, right? You feel yourself getting pissed off, and if you can switch into that mindset, you can't maintain that pissed offness in the same, it takes on an elevated quality, actually.
Well,
You're no longer responsive.
I think it's just harder to be consciously get unpissed off. I think it's easier to get.
Absolutely.
I think it's easier to get consciously less gratitude or less humble or more humble. I think that's what I meant. It's like just the degree of where the emotion is. The anger and wrath and frustration to a certain extent are instinctive. They're instinctive for from a survivability point of view.
Okay.
Humbleness, maybe
Let's
not.
come at it again. Let's come at it again, because this is so important, Sachin. What I want to emphasize to you is that the person who acts as though they have a lot of gratitude, it is just as much a response as someone who acts angry all the time, if they're not actually conscious. They can't help it, do you see? Some people are just naturally gravitate towards, being nice.
I haven't seen very many of those, so maybe that's what's
Yeah.
missing.
Yeah. But it has no higher or lower value. It really doesn't. This is a tough concept to get around us because we live in such a moralistic society. But unless you're conscious and there for it, neither of them have any value. In fact, it's probably not even you doing it, really. It's the planet saying, this machine is better designed, better suited for anger. That machine is better suited for gratitude. So I'm going to extract what I need from it by pouring one into one and another into another. If you're not there, you're just a machine working on behalf of the planet. You see? It's not higher or lower. Absolutely not. The only higher aspect is if you're actually conscious of it at the time. And I do mean conscious in that vivid sense of the word, not just like, God, I'm an asshole. Yeah.
Even from that point of view, right? And I can distinctly remember being angry, consciously being angry, vividly being more angry than I can vividly being humble. I mean, or being vividly being expressing gratitude. It to me just feels. I don't know. I'll think about this a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. Work on it. The story of Jesus going into the temple and crushing over all the people who are selling stuff. Yeah. The money changers and all that type of stuff. The story in the Bible. There's a couple ways to read that, right? Either he lost his temper, which seems very unquote unquote Jesus-like, yeah, or he found that was the right ingredient at the time and was able to summon the essence of that to power that event. I'll leave you with which is it, yeah. All right. Are we all good? Yeah. All right.
Yes,
Is this useful?
perfectly. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. I'll make the recording available to each of you, and probably sometime later this evening or tomorrow. Okay.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll see you all next week. Feel free to write me in the meantime if you have things that come up or questions or whatnot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye
a
for
lot.
now.
Great week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.